Well, hello! This is the second part to a much longer reaction. If you haven't seen them yet, links to them are in the description as well in the top corner of the video. Now, with that out of the way, let's get this thing started then, shall we?
In other words, what do the Undertale characters do correctly in Toby Fox's eyes that Spamton does incorrectly? Keep this question in mind, as I'll be wrapping back around to it in a little bit. The second major theme of Spamton's story, and the theme that most majorly impacted me personally, was the theme of societal neglect.
Yeah,
Something
definitely.
that really struck me about Spamton's downward arc is that it really wasn't his fault. Throughout his entire story, he's just doing what's expected of him, and yet he's constantly punished for it. He's an Addison, so he became a salesman, as that's what's expected of Addisons. He enthusiastically did his job, too, so nobody can claim he wasn't giving it his all. And yet, his business failed. Why did it fail? Was it because he was bad at his job? Well, no. The other Addisons state that the only difference between them and him was that Spamton was unlucky. Right out the gate, Spamton is suffering because of the job he was born into. But what came next was far more cruel.
Yeah, once he actually did start succeeding, that's when everybody left him. And when he was only left with the money and the fame, which then themselves also began to run out. And after that, when that ran out, he had literally no, support network at all.
Not only was Spamton being punished by his industry, even though he was doing everything correctly, but when he finally found success with the help of the mysterious phone entity, he was punished for that too. The other Addisons, instead of celebrating the success of their friend, were filled with jealousy. Instead of viewing this as Spamton being rewarded for his hard work, they viewed him as unworthy. As a result, every single Addison turned their back on him and left Spamton without a single real friend. This moment, this abandonment by the Addisons, is, in my opinion, the moment that doomed Spamton. Throughout his story, his suffering would have been greatly alleviated if he had even a single friend there to give him some support. If even a single one of his allies or co-workers had actually shown any real compassion to the man, this whole tragic story could have been averted. If the Addisons had been there for him when he fell from grace, or if one of the butlers had given him a little bit of help, or if anyone had stepped in to give Spamton a place to stay after being evicted, then his developing mental illness could have been curtailed. Instead, everyone just turned a blind eye. And to be clear, this isn't them forgetting Spamton exists and not realizing he needs help. Everyone knew the truth. The butlers knew what Spamton was going through, as they had to keep him from invading the mansion all the time. The Addisons knew what he was going through, as they all show up in the dump after you defeat Spamton Neo. That means not only did they know what Spamton was going through, but they even knew where he lived. They knew he was living in dumpsters like an animal, and yet they did nothing. However, what's especially frustrating is that there is no single villain who can be blamed for Spamton's downfall, because no single person did anything particularly cruel to him. They all contributed in small ways, but when looked at in isolation, these contributions don't seem all that villainous. Unfriending your coworker out of jealousy is not kind, but it's not your responsibility to be friends with everyone you meet. Evicting a tenant who hasn't paid rent is not kind, but you're just enforcing the lease agreement. It's not your fault he took an apartment he couldn't afford. Establishing a capitalist economy that allows random chance to leave people homeless on the street, again, is not kind, but you can't really blame Queen for allowing a system that most of society is comfortable with.
God, thinking about that, it reflects a lot of real world problems, doesn't it? Like, I know, I remember when I went to college, I'd have to go downtown a lot, and almost every day when I walked down, I'd always pass by, like, the same few homeless people on the street. And when I first started going down there, I did try to help a bit. You know, I threw them the couple of bucks that I did have in my wallet. But it got to the point where I honestly couldn't do it anymore. Because, like, you know, the saying goes, you give till it hurts. And I mean, I didn't have a job. I was in college. And so, like, my finances were, very, limited. So I just started, trying my best to avoid and ignore them. Just making sure if I was coming up to a spot where they were, I'd walk by really quickly. And thinking about it, from all the research and stuff I have, like, come across over the years, it's stuff like that legitimately, like, creates mental illness when you don't treat them like people. It really is sad. I mean, it really is sad because, like, a lot of the time, they're on the street because they already have something with them, like, going on with them. Like, I know, like, a couple of blocks away from me, there's, like, one of those dead-end streets where the exit leads to a park. And, like, more often than not, there'll be, like, a homeless guy sitting there on the corner, not panhandling or anything, just sitting there existing. And it doesn't matter what time of year, whether it's the summer or winter, he's always wrapped up in the same worn out jacket. He's always just huddled there sitting on the curb, long like gray beard. He's an older guy. And, like, I remember once, like, my mom went over to him. She had just we were emptying out our closet, getting rid of, like, old stuff, and we found an old winter jacket of mine that was actually never used because we had gotten it. Like, it had been given to us, and, like, it was too small for me or my brother to wear, so it just sat in the closet. Now, a normal-sized person would fit in fine, but, I'm big. And I remember my mom went over to him and asked, like, hey, we got this new jacket, do you want it? And he just said no. He just shook his head and waved her off and said no. I mean, like, you treat them as people. I mean, and as people, they still have their pride. But again, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're out there because you're not doing well mentally already. But then just the circumstances that being homeless does to a person just makes it worse.
Even the phone entity can't truly be marked as acting villainous here. This entity gave Spamton a hand when he was struggling, and while it's not kind to abandon someone, it's also not your responsibility to support an entrepreneur if you don't want to. Do you see what the problem is? It's not that these people are villains who stole Spamton's happiness. They're just ordinary people who stood idly by while his life fell apart. They felt no moral obligation to help him, so they didn't. Now, I'm gonna get a bit real for a moment. The reason that this story of societal neglect hits so hard for me is because it is so true to life. In the United States alone, there are 32 million people living in poverty, and over 500,000 of those people are homeless. Despite being in the most wealthy country in the world by a huge margin, we allow all these people to live in despair. And yet, who is to blame? Who can we point the finger at to hold responsible for this suffering? Sure, it's easy to point our fingers at the politicians and the elite, but when we're done ranting at them for their cruelty, what do? Nothing. We don't actually try to fix the problem. We just complain about the issue and then move on.
God, that just reminds me of, the whole thing where you have, like, hostile architecture that cities put in. Instead of putting money down to try to, like, build shelters or help the homeless, they spend money on, like, poorly designed, like, benches, or just removing benches, or putting, like, weird bumps and seams on things so that you can't use them to lie down and be comfortable if you need them.
We assume it's someone else's responsibility to help these people. Here's an example. How many times have you, in your car driving home, found yourself stopped at a stoplight, and out of the corner of your eye, you see someone standing on the side of the road? They're dressed in old, worn-out clothes, they look haggard and unkempt, and they're holding up a cardboard sign begging for any scrap of money or food that you can spare. And you, sitting in your air-conditioned car, listening to Spotify, proceed to avert your gaze and pretend you didn't see them. It's too sad to cope with, so you pretend it didn't happen. As soon as that light turns green, you gun it and get away from that person as fast as possible. You go home, eat some food, watch some Netflix, and play some games before going to sleep in your bed. All memory of that sad, destitute person pushed from your mind. After all, you've got a life to live. You've got a job to do. You don't have time to feel bad about every sob story in the world, right? You tell yourself this to feel better. All the while, that same sad person scavenges in the trash for food before sleeping under a bridge or in a dirty alleyway. On some days, if you happen to have the spare change and are in the right mood, you may generously decide to give that homeless person a couple dollars, and then you go home with a little smile on your face, confident that you really are a good person, content in your random act of kindness for the year. Of course, that person is still destitute and homeless, but it's not your job to save their life, right? To be clear, I'm not getting up on a soapbox and announcing my own moral superiority. I've done this exact same thing countless times for the exact same reasons that everyone else does.
God. That makes me think. And whenever we've come across, the kind of people where they'll be standing at the on the median of like a major intersection, and like they'll walk up and down, the median, walking past cars whenever they're stopped at the red light. I mean, like, you always have to be careful, because I know there's been a couple of times, like, my mom has said it in the past, where she's actually gone to, like, either Tim Hortons or some other small restaurant and actually bought, like, a fresh, hot meal for the occasional person and tried to give it to them. And the story goes that most of the time, they don't accept them. Which, I mean, I can partially understand. on the one hand, there's like more than enough stories you hear online where somebody's done that and the food's been purposely poisoned, or it's had like poop or something put into it just to make them feel sick or something like that. But at the same time, there are those people out there that, you know, they panhandle, they get money, and they're sick or they're addicts, and they'll just go off to buy a drink or, you know, try to score some drugs of some kind. But going back to, like, the people walking the median, like, just extended from that, like, I've heard stories of, like, you know, people doing it because, oh, it pays well. It's like, hey, on a good day, they can get, like, $1,500 just by doing that. Ugh. But then you get the people that actually, you know, are in a bad place. Like, my mom and dad kind of come at it from, like, two different perspectives, like, two different directions. Like, my mom, the most recent one she saw, it was, like, a younger guy. She said probably looked just a bit older than me, but you looked and his foot, one of his feet was just pointing the other way. And from what she said, like, the way she's thought about it is, like, that's somebody's son. And if he's out here, like, why is he out here? Is he out here because, like, he doesn't have a place to call home anymore? Is he out here because the place he came from wasn't worth calling home? So just the idea that, you know, every, you know, person out there, no matter how old, is somebody's child. And the thought that, you know, they're out here for a reason, whether it's intentional or otherwise, like, it can be so sad. While my dad comes from the other direction and is, from what he's said, you know, is much more pragmatic, where he'd look at somebody and say, like, would I hire them? Like, if I was doing something and I was hiring people for it, like, would they look trustworthy to hire? Like, for him, I'd imagine, he hasn't said this specifically, but I'd almost imagine he'd probably, you know, be more favorable towards, like, the older people that are out there, or something like that. At the end of the day, we're all humans. Oh, God, I'm honestly on the verge of tears from that. Sorry.
But in order to understand just how devastatingly real Spamton's story is, you have to understand the disturbingly grounded nature of his tale. Spamton is not a mad king or a tyrannical supercomputer or a demonic flower. He's a salesman. He's a normal guy. His story is completely mundane, and the suffering he undergoes is the kind of suffering that millions of real people go through every day. That's why the line that hurt me more than any other line in Spamton's story is a random piece of flavor text in the Spamton Neo boss fight. Spamton begs the audience to stop taking the furniture out of his room. Such a simple line, and yet it breaks my heart. The vision of this sad little man begging to be left with anything is just so horrible. The reason this theme hits me so hard personally is because I am devastated by the neglect that the lowest members of our society go through. It's so upsetting because it's completely avoidable. If we, as a community, wanted to solve the homeless crisis, we could do it easily, but we don't. We've got lives to live and responsibilities to uphold, and fitting in time to help out random strangers just isn't feasible. Or at least, That's what we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
That's why the real villain of Spamton's story isn't Queen, or the Addisons, or Gaster, or anyone in particular. The real villain of Spamton's story is every single person who saw him suffering and did nothing. They didn't hurt Spamton, they just didn't help him either. It wasn't cruelty, it was the lack of kindness. They simply neglected him. And so, alone and destitute, Spamton slipped further and further into madness. This, in turn, is also what makes Spamton such a terrifying villain. It's precisely because he's not a mad king or a demonic flower that he is so unnerving. Spamton is scary because Spamton is real. You, listening at home, are extremely unlikely to encounter a cruel oligarch or a serial killer, but you are likely to encounter someone who is down on their luck. Someone whose family has disowned them and who's living out of their car. Someone who, for just being a little bit unlucky, are discarded like so much trash. Someone whose underlying mental illnesses are being intensely amplified by the uncaring society they are forced to live in. Spamton is literally just a mentally ill homeless man whose life fell apart. That's his whole origin story. And that origin story is being recreated every single day that these very real people are forced to suffer.
You know, I was wondering what specifically about this video, like, why was it being requested so adamantly? But I've honestly figured it out now. It's because it gets you right here. Makes you feel bad for not doing enough, even if it's all you can do. I mean, there's all the talk about, about like helping the homeless and stuff like that. And there's honestly only so much an individual person can do. Like I said before, give until it hurts. But right now, like, a lot of people are hurting. And that's what makes it worse. Because I'd imagine there are even more people out there that want to do something to help, but literally can't because they're just barely keeping their own heads above water with the way things are right now.
Every day that we as a society allow people to live like dogs, we are laying the groundwork for tragedy. As long as we passively neglect the people who are suffering, we are contributing to the creation of mentally unhinged men and women with nothing to lose, just like Spamton. No single person is responsible for saving these people, but if we do nothing, we will all suffer the consequences. That is what Spamton's theme of societal neglect conveys to me. Of course, after hearing all this, you're probably feeling just a tiny bit bummed out.
Oh yeah,
It probably
exactly,
seems
yes.
like Spamton's story is just one big cruel joke in which the punchline is human nature. And for the most part, that's an accurate assessment. Between his failed search for freedom and the neglect he suffered at the hands of his own people, it's easy to conclude that there's no hope to be found in this tragedy. However, believe it or not, there is a silver lining to all this. A faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, all this pain and misery wasn't all for nothing. And that hope comes in the form of the third and final theme of Spamton's story that we will be discussing today. The theme of friendship. Now, I know you might have some instinctually cynical or sarcastic reaction to hearing me talk about the power of friendship, but this is serious.
Yeah, insert My Little Pony joke here.
So please, take a moment to pack away all that irony and cynicism and listen with an unclouded mind. Remember when I asked you what it was the Undertale characters did correctly to earn their freedom that Spamton did incorrectly?
They worked together?
It's time to answer that question, as it is extremely important for understanding not only Spamton's story, but also one of the overarching morals of Toby Fox's work in general. You see, if I were to ask you what the main message of Undertale was, there's an above average chance that you'd say something about determination. While determination
Gee, I feel so cold out right now.
is a literal metaphysical force in these games, it's also a very intentional literary device. By having the characters with quote-unquote determination be the ones who control the destiny of the world, Toby Fox is sending a very clear message. If you have enough determination, you can accomplish almost anything. It's a message about the importance of willpower, how with enough willpower, almost any obstacle can be overcome. I avoided using the word determination when describing Spamton due to determination being a literal magical power in this setting. But make no mistake, from a character standpoint, Spamton is just as determined as any character you'd care to name. And his determination, in line with Toby Fox's worldview, definitely shows results. Even though he failed in the end, he did successfully become the most powerful being we've ever seen in this game.
Again, very aged poorly statement. The Knight and Titan would like to have a word with you.
And the only reason he had the chance to do this is thanks to his determination. However, there's a reason that Spamton failed, and it ties back to this message. If you have enough determination, you can accomplish almost anything. The operative word here being almost. Toby Fox wants us to know the importance and power of determination, but he also wants us to know its limitations. It'll carry you a very long ways, but to achieve your wildest dreams, you'll need more than determination. And this is showcased in every single route of Undertale. In the neutral route, Omega Flowey has more determination. He's a monster beyond your comprehension. You cannot beat him. You fail. In the pacifist route, Azrael is a literal god with infinite actual power. Obviously, you cannot beat him. You fail.
The only time that you actually beat them is when you have help from others. In the normal route, it's from the other souls inside Flowey. And when you're beating Azrael, it's from the people, the souls that Azrael's sucked into themselves. And the only way you're able to break them out is with your friendship that you've made along the way.
And in the genocide route, Sans is a reality-hopping demigod who can abuse the rules of the game to trap you in an eternal battle. You cannot beat him either.
Okay, actually, wait a second. That one kind of falls apart a bit because you can beat him by yourself. You just have to get him tired.
You fail. In every single timeline, there is no possible way for Frisk to win, no matter how much determination they possess. Or To be more precise, there's no possible way for them to win alone. In every route of the game, Frisk receives aid from countless kind and friendly allies. They offer protection, guidance, companionship, and most importantly of all, friendship.
Okay, how does this work with the genocide route, given that you literally kill all of them?
And it is this that gives Frisk what they need to win. Determination carries them far, but it is only with the help of others that they can cross the finish line. Against Omega Flowey, it is only with the support and aid of the other human souls that Frisk can achieve victory. Against Azrael, when Frisk is completely overwhelmed, overpowered, and not even capable of moving their body, their only way to succeed is by saving their friends. Their friends give Frisk the strength to carry on, and it is only by literally saving your adversary, by being a real friend to Azrael, that you can achieve success. Toby Fox is so devoted to this moral, to this theme, that it even proves to be true in Genocide. That's right, even the route where you kill everyone holds this message. You cannot beat Sans. You never land a single blow on him. It's Kara who lands the killing strike.
Oh, that's what you were getting at. Okay.
Not Frisk or the player. Even in the most antisocial route of them all, it's only with the help of your partner that you can find success. Which means, hilariously, the Genocide route is about how the power of friendship, like all forms of power, can in fact be used for evil. That's how devoted Toby Fox is to getting this message across. Determination can get you a lot, but it's determination combined with the help of others that you need to achieve true success. Frisk always has determination and friendship, so they always succeed in their goal. That is what makes them different from Spamton. Spamton may have had determination in droves, but in the end, it couldn't hold a candle to someone who had determination and friends.
I mean, again, and the only time, Spamton actually did proceed in his goals, where, he gained the new body, he became powerful. It was only after getting help from Chris.
That was Spamton's greatest weakness. That is what's at the core of Spamton's tragedy. He may have had piles of internal strength, but without the care and support of others, it amounted to nothing. But wait, I promised you a silver lining, and I wasn't lying. You see, while Spamton's life is 99% suffering and loneliness, there was one time he found real hope. One time he found real companionship. One time he found a real friend. I am, of course, talking about Chris. With Spamton's madness and Chris being a mute slave to the player, it's easy to miss the budding relationship between these two, but it's definitely there, and I feel the need to prove this fact before continuing the narrative analysis, because it's very important that you see and believe that this bond between them really exists in order for this narrative to fully hit home. Spamton instantly understands Chris's plight and repeatedly emphasizes how similar they are. The entire first fight with Spamton isn't really a fight. It's a sales pitch, with Spamton trying to convince Chris that his plan to achieve freedom has merit. I believe that's why Spamton has this moment where he literally heals you to full health if you need it.
Honestly, again, the fact that that's actually a thing, and you can use it during the Spamton fight, God, I wish I'd known that earlier. That is beautiful.
He doesn't actually want to hurt you. He wants to make a deal and judge Chris's character. When Chris shows up at his shop later, Chris tells Susie and Rouse to wait outside. This is notable because it's not something we order Chris to do. It's just something they do of their own volition. And I think it's because they want to respect Spamton's wish that they come alone. Spamton is overjoyed that Chris came, and when asking about friends, Spamton insists that he and Chris are already good friends. Spamton still hates the world for what it did to him, which is why he says they don't need anyone else, but from this point onwards, Spamton fully intends to help Chris gain freedom. When becoming Neo, although Spamton acts very intimidating and threatening and fully intends to kill Chris, it's not out of malice. He really does think that absorbing Chris's soul will be what's best for both of them. While we technically don't know how the soul mechanics work in Deltarune, in Undertale, having your soul absorbed didn't mean you were dead. It actually meant that you shared a body with whoever absorbed you, which is what we see with Azriel and Kara. And given this line from Spamton, in which he begs Chris to become a part of his heart, I'd say it seems likely that souls function similarly here. At the very least, Spamton believes they do.
Honestly, thinking about it, what do you think, like, if Spamton had succeeded in taking the soul, like, what would have happened? Because he's not a monster, he's a darkener. And we know those are two very different things. So, like, would Spamton have gained the ability to exist outside a dark world? Would he have essentially become a Lightner? God, that'd be weird.
And he demonstrates this throughout his dialogue during the Spamton Neo battle. Just like in his first fight, this battle isn't really about fighting as much as it is about Spamton trying to convince Chris that this is a good plan. It's another sales pitch, and as is appropriate for a sales pitch, Spamton repeatedly emphasizes how this will allow both of them to see into heaven, to gain freedom, and to become big shots. Spamton promises that if Chris accepts this deal, he will literally give Chris everything he has. And if the mechanics of soul absorption are the same as in Undertale, then that seems very likely to be true. Spamton would literally be giving Chris partial control over his body, which is an extremely generous thing for Spamton to do when you remember that his whole story is about gaining freedom, and yet he's willing to give Chris power over him. Even Spamton's theme music supports the existence of
freedom
this
motif.
relationship.
Yep.
Now's your chance to be a big shot. Spamton's music is literally him offering freedom to Chris. Make no mistake, Spamton is deranged, and he is a threat to himself and others, but at his core, I am convinced that he really does want to help Chris. He really is trying to do right by his friend. And I think Chris's reactions during all this further support this interpretation of their relationship. When Chris first gets knocked back by Spamton, notice how they don't even try to get back up. They don't pull their sword, they don't try to run away, and they don't even raise their shield.
No, they were already just fully accepting it. Oh, God, I never even thought of that. Oh.
Even after being rescued by Susie and Rouse, Chris stays on the ground. And when Spamton sends the floating heads to try and attack them, notice that Chris is still just kneeling on the ground. They aren't trying to defend themselves. Sure, their soul emerges to try and shoot back at the Spamton heads, but that's almost certainly not something Chris is choosing to do. In both chapter endings, we repeatedly see it shown that the soul is more identified with the player than it is with Chris, as Chris will literally go off on their own to do what they please. This is further supported by the fact that we have to press the button to shoot in this sequence. Chris has nothing to do with it. Honestly, there is an argument to be made that Chris was actually willing to go along with Spamton's plan.
Honestly, that is just super disturbing.
They don't fight back at all until we force them to. Rouse and Susie assumed Chris needed help, but for all we know, Chris wanted this to happen. And the reaction after the Neo battle further supports them caring about Spamton, as they are visibly upset by the whole ordeal. Chris is a very taciturn character, so the instances in which their emotions are strong enough for other characters to notice are pretty rare. One such instance being in Chapter 1, when Chris is visibly angered when Monster Kid trash talks Susie. Chris doesn't appreciate people disrespecting their friends. And I'd argue that something very similar is happening here. They are visibly shaken, and when asked if they're okay, they yell no if we let them. Chris never showed this level of emotion after any of the life-threatening situations they'd been through, which says to me that it's specifically because of their relationship with Spamton that this situation upset them so much. I think Chris really does care about him. And while the Chris side of this friendship is hard to prove, the Spamton side is pretty much undeniable.
Yeah,
Spamton
definitely
believes he and Chris are real friends, and this is never better demonstrated than at the end of their battle in the pacifist route. Upon realizing that Chris hasn't been attacking him directly, but has instead been cutting his wires, Spamton immediately assumes that this is Chris trying to set him free. Even now, after everything, Spamton really does believe that Chris has his best interest at heart. He really does think that he and Chris are on the same team, and that they both want to win freedom for each other. As a result, Spamton declares triumphantly that he is now ready, after all this time, to live not just for himself, but for the sake of his friend as well. With the evidence of their friendship laid out, we can get back to the narrative analysis. And can I just say, this is one of the saddest, yet most heartfelt friendships I've ever seen.
You know, when I went to do this reaction, I honestly did wonder what, what a video talking about Spamton, like what could actually be talked about for like an hour and a half before, even chapters 3 and 4 came out, where we got, all that other Spamton stuff, the little bits of Spamton lore in chapter 3. I never anticipated, they'd be talking about, societal neglect and homelessness, and, like, hope, determination, friendship. Honestly, this whole video has been just such a massive roller coaster. It honestly has.
With Chris being this standoffish teenager who normally seems so cold, and Spamton being this mentally deranged old man, seeing these two characters find empathy and camaraderie in their shared struggles is strangely wholesome. It kind of reminds me of the relationship between Ice King and Marceline from Adventure Time, with Spamton's mental illness making him dangerous and hard to be around, but with Chris still caring for him like a beloved uncle whose mind just isn't all there anymore.
God, you had to bring up the Marceline and Ice King relationship. Oh God, no, not the good stuff, no!
And it's in this relationship, in this bond, that I believe the silver lining of Spamton's story is to be found. It's in their friendship that Spamton finds redemption. As I said earlier, one of the main morals of Toby Fox's work is that determination alone will carry you far, but friendship is what you need to reach true success. And I think he intentionally wrote Spamton's story to reflect that. Spamton spent potentially decades desperately trying to break into the Queen's mansion, only for it to always end in failure. And yet, when he finally makes a single real friend in Chris, he achieves all his wildest dreams in a single day. He goes from living in a dumpster to becoming a mechanical demigod in a single afternoon. And it's all thanks to Chris. They found in each other someone who could understand their plight. As far as we know, Spamton is the only character to realize what's happening to Chris, as he literally calls them a heart on a chain, with an otherworldly entity controlling them. So imagine...
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, there's been lots of hints pointing towards, Rousey knowing, that the player's there and stuff like that. And, everybody's talked about the potential of Susie eventually finding out. The fact that currently, even, up to this point, there's only been one character in the entire game that's really figured out what's going on with Chris and offered to try to help him. Even Rousey. Rousey might know what's going on with Chris, but they're not doing anything to help. If anything, they're trying their best to soothe and pacify us. They're not offering any ways out for Chris.
Chris's relief at someone not only understanding their situation, but also actively trying to help Chris escape their bondage. There's something so sad about the idea of Chris only finding someone who can truly understand them in the form of a man who can barely form a coherent sentence. And while the Chris side of this story is more depressing than anything, the Spamton side has an aura of hope and relief to it. Chris is still in the midst of their tragic tale, so they get no relief after defeating Spamton. If anything, they're suffering even more now.
Yeah.
But for Spamton, this was the best time of his life. He not only was achieving his goals, but more importantly, he wasn't alone anymore. The one thing that everyone in his world had denied him, friendship, Chris had given him. He doesn't have to live for just himself anymore. And while he ultimately fails in his quest, I think the reason this is the failure that ultimately does him in and causes him to give up isn't because his spirit was broken or his determination ran out. I think it's because for the first time in his life, he doesn't have to fight this battle alone anymore. Spamton's story is about a simple man with a simple goal: to gain freedom. In the search of that goal, he does everything society tells him to, only for everyone to turn on him out of petty jealousy and cold-hearted neglect. He spent ages alone in the dump, his fractured heart seething with bitterness at the world that had discarded him as his mind fell into shambles. His perseverance, rather than earning him victory, only served to prolong his suffering. And yet, despite all this, in the final leg of his journey, in the 11th hour of his life, he found a glimmer of hope. A spark of kindness, generosity, and support from a true kindred spirit.
And at the end of the day, that's all he needed. It's all he needed for it. That little bit is all he needed to actually make a difference. Again, this entire video, I keep I keep fearing, because, like, this is going to be, it's so long, it's going to be split up into multiple videos, but I keep fearing that, like, the second half is going to be, just me sitting here sad and depressed watching the video. But, like, that really is, like, this entire video has been such a roller coaster. It's just constantly hitting me in the feels, like, over and over and over. I mean, like, I've talked before about, like, the question of, like, would Spamton be as popular of a character if he hadn't been, like, if there hadn't been the major gap between chapter 2 and chapter 3 and 4. Thinking about it, like, I hope he would have been just as popular either way. Because honestly, like, his story, like, when you actually boil it down like this, it's just, it's sad and just needs to be heard.
As he lay there, strung up in the strings of his own creation, having failed for the final time, a moment of clarity and self-reflection came over him. He had failed once again, and yet he didn't feel the need to get back up. He didn't feel the need to continue the struggle, because now he knew someone else would carry on the fight. Like a forgotten soldier fueled by spite and rage and left on duty for years in a never-ending war, Spamton was tired of the fighting. And Chris,
finally
without even realizing it, was giving him permission to stop. Permission to lay down his sword. They would carry on the struggle for freedom. He could finally rest. At any other time in his life, Spamton would have clawed his way back from this failure, more wounded and fractured than ever in his desperate, lonely quest. But not this time. This time, for the first time, he had someone he could lean on. With his final spoken line, Spamton passes on what power he has to Chris. He had failed to find his own freedom. But that's okay, because he could still find some peace of mind by helping Chris find their freedom.
Which, actually, just on like a little side tangent here, it is ironic, isn't it, that, one of the things you can get from Spamton is, the failed salesman, is an item that makes your own income from battles and stuff like that massively increase. It is honestly a little ironic right there.
When Jevil was defeated, he turned into an item, just like Spamton, and he described this process as being akin to a deep sleep. I'd like to think that Spamton, after such a long, cruel, lonely life, has finally found a place he can call home. I hope he's sleeping peacefully in the company of his one true friend. And with that, we've reached the end of my analysis. I hope you enjoyed this dive into the themes and narrative of Spamton. Naturally, there are plenty of ways you can look at Spamton's story that I did not personally focus on, like the inherent critique of capitalism, or how he demonstrates the way we demonize and alienate the downtrodden members of society. But I think I covered the most important themes of this story with regards to the overarching narrative that Toby Fox wants to tell. The societal neglect theme was of especial importance to me personally, so I hope that section effectively communicated my feelings. Remember that this is only the first part of the Spamton analysis series, so if you enjoyed this, then make sure to subscribe to see future discussions on this sad, strange little man. Next video, I will be analyzing every possible meaning of hyperlink blocked, so you'll definitely want to check that out. And of course,
I already
I'd like
did.
to thank my patrons, whose generosity is of real help during these difficult times. Student loan debts and medical bills are a constant boogeyman, so y'all helping out with this is extremely appreciated. A special thanks go out to Lil Nyrus X, Umbra, E-Roll, and Ray. Your support
Captain
means
Floor
more
Bagel.
than you could know. That's it for the video.
Oh, God. So, finally got that one done and dusted. Again, just the... Again, I always thought of, Spamton as being, the funny little salesman guy that talked funny. It honestly never occurred to me the parallels that could be drawn between him and actual homelessness. And also just the fact that, like, oh yeah, he's like, he's all about determination and trying to, change his fate and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it was not possible for him to do it himself. You need outside help. Honestly, that's gonna make me rethink, Spamton for a while. But yeah, that's definitely going to be it for now. So yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.